All right, I'd like to bring this meeting of the West Elsa Milwaukee School District School Board to order. Ms. Steele, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. All right, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Sikich is excused. Ms. Deal,
here.
Mr. Burns,
Present.
Mr. Eustruck,
Here.
Mrs. Justin,
Is excused.
excused. Mrs. Carr,
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Here.
Mr. Keller,
Here.
President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any modifications to the agenda today?
Given that we have some members of the public that are not following our mask requirements, I'd like to suggest that we reorder the agenda to move to the consent agenda and action, and consider public comments at the end if there is an opportunity for it.
Is that a punishment?
All right, that sounds good to me. So we will move on to our consent agenda. All right, so we'll start with,
Oh, they're moving us to the, okay.
Is that a punishment?
we have item 9.1, the approval of minutes. Item 9.2, our employment summary. Item 9.3, our supplementary contracts. And item 9.4, our financial summary. Is there any items that need to be separated out? If not, I would look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. So move on to our action items. Item 10.1, Central High School Pom Dance Team extended travel to Orlando, Florida. Oops, is this the wrong?
You're in the wrong
I
one.
apologize. I'm in the wrong agenda.
Different one is Lane.
Apologize about that real quick. So we actually did not have a financial summary in that last one. Do I need to redo that?
It probably makes sense to clarify it.
Okay. So let's go back to that consent agenda. I had the wrong one from last meeting. So we have item 9.1, the approval of minutes from our September 27th, 2021 meeting. We have our employment summary, and we have our supplementary contracts. Does anyone have anything need to be separated out for those three? All right. If not, I'd look for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Now we'll move on to item 10.1, which is Lane Intermediate School extended travel to Washington, D.C., June 12th through 15th, 2022. And Ms. Raymer, is she on? She's on Zoom.
I am on the Zoom tonight, so hopefully you can hear me. Yep. Good, thank you. So yep, this is actually a shift of the dates. We had previously approved this trip and then they weren't able to go due to COVID and all of those things. So it's just been switched to new dates, but we thought it was important to get it back in front of the board to make sure that we are still under approval as we had approved it, and then they couldn't do it. Costs for the trip have stayed pretty similar. They're doing a lot of fundraising again to make sure it's accessible to as many students as possible. There are COVID mitigation procedures and precautions in the guidance for the company that the school has contracted to do this trip with. And the trip is now proposed for June 12th through June 15th, 2022.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Deidre about this trip? This is one that we had seen previously, just shifting the dates. Everything else is pretty similar. If not, I would look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
No,
Opposed?
you're muted. I can't hear you.
Oh. All right, hopefully you can hear me now. All right, we had a motion and a second, and it was just unanimously approved. Did I say opposed?
No.
All those opposed? All right, it passes. All right, we'll move on to item 10.2, WA Trust Health Insurance Renewal for 2022. Ms. Windler. and et al.
Hayes team.
All right. Good evening, everybody. We are working through an annual item. This is our renewal of our health insurance premium for the calendar year of 2022. Our Hayes team joins us, so we have Chris Smessert and Lorenzo DiMatteo from Hayes. They'll be walking through a short presentation tonight on how the negotiations and the renewal process went. Each year, we go through this renewal and ensure that what we are presenting and moving forward is what is in the best interest of our school district finance-wise and our staff members. So the renewal that we had for 2021 last year came with a rate cap for 2022 and 2023. The rate cap for 2022 presented by WEA was 8.5%. And as Hayes team will talk through tonight, the initial offer was 8.5 and we negotiated it down. And there are a number of reasons why we are recommending tonight that we move forward with WEA for another year. And one of those reasons is the rate that WEA provides is lower than the trend in the marketplace. So we'll show you the last few years and how the renewals that we've received have proved to be beneficial for us in terms of being lower than the market trend throughout those years. So I'll turn it over to Hayes to kind of walk through just the 4 slides tonight on our renewal for WEA.
Thanks, Caitlin. And could you go back to the first slide? Thank you. So as Caitlin referenced, the renewal of WEA Trust is for January 1 of 2022. On this slide, we're just looking at the plan design for 2021. So really the current plan design that you have in place today. District offers 2 medical plan options, a $500 deductible and $1,500 deductible plan with WEA Trust. And then in addition to that, you can just see on the slide some of the additional in and out of network benefits being offered today.
Caitlin, do we have access to this?
Yep, this is posted on Board Book for board and for the public at this time. So
Okay.
this presentation that you're
Oh, I
working
see it.
through.
Thank you.
Yep, and then the exec summary, and then there are 2 attachments that are also attached to Board Book for public view.
So when WEA Trust, as well as really any fully insured medical carriers looking at what the renewal is going to be for a school district or any organization at that, they look at really 2 24-month periods of claims, and they break those up into the most recent 12 and the prior 12 months. And that's really one of the driving factors as to how they're getting to what their projected costs are or premium for the future year. So when we look at your rolling 12 months, the loss ratio from July of 20 through June 21 of incurred claims paid through August of 2021, the loss ratio is 91.3%. If we look back at the prior 12-month period before that, so claims incurred July 19 through June 2020, paid through 8/20, there's an 89.7%. So when we look at the most recent month compared to the prior, the plan from a loss ratio perspective is running a little higher, meaning that the insurance company is paying out a little bit more in claims than they did in the prior period compared to the premiums that are being received. And then the combined rolling 12, 24 months, those numbers combined is about 90.5%.
And worth pointing out here, when we talk loss ratios, we're talking, in this case, premiums paid versus just the medical claims. So there are other expenses that come into play when an insurance company is calculating its renewal. That is all relevant to the renewal calculation that we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. So for 2022, the initial renewal, as Caitlin mentioned, was at 8.5% increase, which is the overall rate cap that was part of the agreement with WEA. There are, as we talked about, the main driving factor in that is the loss ratio with the district. Now, when we look at loss ratios typically in the marketplace, what we would expect to see for a group that's, say, 80 to 85, looking into the really mid to high single-digit increase generally for that. So a loss ratio combined of 90% with the most recent 12 months running a little bit higher than that, around 91 or so percent. Now, that is calling for that 8.5 or that rate cap. Through additional conversations and negotiation with WEA Trust, we were really able to get that down to a 4.8% increase. A big part of that, there was a couple of things, but a big part of that is just the relationship that they've had historically with the district overall. There is value in having a long-term relationship from a insurance perspective, which is part of the reason we were able to get that down. Now you'll see the final increase is 5.8%. As we've discussed previously, by removing the post-65 retiree population, part of that was increasing the rates for the active group by 1%, but that did provide, as we've talked about, significant savings to the district overall by removing that population, moving them to that Anthem plan. Also noted here, just on the slide, the rate cap for 2023, which previously was negotiated, is still 9.9%. And then, as I mentioned, one of the driving factors here is the historical relationship with the district. Another piece of this is that WEA Trust does put significant investment into condition management programs that I'd say is unique compared to some other fully insured medical carriers, such as the Livongo Diabetes Management Program, their Interlink Cancer Care Program, and they do have what's called their Novo Health bundled pricing, which does provide additional savings to membership at the district. In addition to that, just the overall service that your membership receives, customer service, continues to be positive, which is not always the case with the insurance market on a fully insured basis. And then in addition to that, with this overall 5.8% increase, there's no change in plan design, so the deductibles, the plans offered, the out-of-pocket maximums, that would remain the same. The network overall, so the providers, the doctors that the district members can utilize and see, would not change as well, so that would all remain the same. And then, as Caitlin referenced as well, just wanted to show you historically what the negotiated or final increases have been in the past couple of years compared to the market trend increase overall. So in 2020, the final increase was about 4.25%. The estimated, we call market trend, it's when we take into account medical and prescription drug claims combined. Prescription drug trend is much higher than medical trend. Medical trend is usually closer to 6%. Prescription drug trend can be 13, even 15%. So we need to look at those combined. That's when we say estimated market trend. That's what those numbers are. And these are what our actuarial team estimates on an annual basis, both in 2020 and then 2021. You can see we're at that 1.3%. The market trend there is 7.5%. And then for 2022, we're estimating medical prescription drug trend to be 7.5% again. And then without removing the retirees, we were at that 4.8%. So overall, consistently, WEA Trust has provided favorable renewals compared to what we're seeing from a market trend average.
And that is all we have tonight. So are there any questions from the board? Okay, and go ahead, Ron.
So these are general percent increases, and that's just a percent of what we're currently paying. Obviously, if we were paying lower than what other people were paying, then our percent increase is actually less, or if we were paying higher, if our costs were higher than a different plan, then our percent increase the percent increase might be less, but the actual increase might be more than somebody else. Is that a correct assumption?
Yep, so I think the clarification is that the percent that we're talking about as an increase is based on our current cost. So you're saying if our current costs were higher and the percent might be lower, then we still might be looking at an increase in cost. So the 5.8% is based on our current costs for our plan. And as a reminder, our district takes 90% of the premium, and the employee takes 10% of the premium or shares in the cost. They pay that 10% of the premium. And those rates are also linked on board book for public and board view tonight too. So both our cost as a district, the 90%, and the employee would go up by 5%. And we would maintain the component of having the wellness eligible or wellness compliance. So if an employee didn't participate in the wellness program, meaning the biometric screening and the follow-up wellness coaching sessions, then they would pay the $50 more. So essentially, all of our employees who are compliant with that wellness program receive a $50 discount per month on their premiums. So the rates that we're looking at in the attached documents are representing of an employee who would be compliant in the wellness program.
Okay. And is there any language that locks the district in for more than this year that we're looking at right now? Or is this just a one-year term that we could look at other possible avenues for health insurance if deemed worthy from our consultants as well as our own financial position for the next year after this? So this is for 2022 we're looking at right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for 2023, we're gonna have to do this again. So is there, I see that there's a renewal cap that they put in there of 9.9%, but that isn't language that says that we have to go with them for the next year, correct?
Correct.
That's correct. Yep, nothing is locking you in from a contract perspective for 2023. That's just a financial just cap so you know what your max cost would be, worst case scenario.
Okay. And there's no language that would say that if we did go to RFP or did and look at other things, that they would change, our rate cap would go away with WAA. We just know that this is what we would be looking at for WAA. If you're looking at others, that wouldn't be affected by that.
Correct. Yep.
Sure. Sorry, I had questions. You guys have any other questions that maybe my questions spurred? Okay, well then I would look for a motion.
Motion to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Move on to item 10.3, which is approval of policy number 167.3, public participation at board meetings. And it'll be Dr. Lexman and I.
Thank you. So this is the third time that the board has had this particular proposed revision to this bylaw or policy of public participation at board meetings in front of it. The first reading was to consider revisions, and the board had some conversation regarding some of the language and change some of that language, and that's appropriate in the process of a first reading. And then because this is a bylaw, it is the Committee of the Whole convenes to consider it, is the first reading. It gets held for 30 days. So the last time the board saw this particular set of revisions was at our last regular meeting, when the board again convened in Committee of the Whole to then forward it, to make a recommendation to forward it to the full board for the second reading and considering approval. And so that's the step that we're in tonight. Typically, policies are simply, they go through one of the board's committees and then they come right to the board. But because of the mechanisms of bylaws being the board's kind of policies that govern themselves, it has that additional step. And so we're at the last step of the board's consideration for the proposed revisions in this particular policy.
All right, so that's like we discussed in the Committee of the Whole at our last meeting. There's no changes from the original approval that we had way back a month ago. And so is there any questions or comments regarding the policy before we look at possibly passing it? If not, I would look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. All right, so that finishes our business for today. I was looking to still do our item 8.2, our board committee reports. I want to give an opportunity for our committees to still give a report. So we have item 8.2.1, employee engagement and culture. Mr. Keller and Ms. Marshall.
All right. See if I can do this without my glasses fogging up too much. The Employee Engagement and Culture Committee met on Tuesday, September 21st at 5:30 p.m. The committee reviewed the harassment and sexual harassment definition wording of Board Policy 22, and apologies. 2266 and 3362. The definition in the two policies is different, and the committee seeks clarity regarding the spirit and intent of the differences. The committee recommended that the definitions be reviewed by legal counsel. And once we receive a legal recommendation and clarity, the committee will determine the appropriateness of any recommended changes. The committee also previewed available child care partnership options through national child care centers that have several locations. We will explore the possibility of conducting a needs assessment to determine the feasibility of a partnership. The HR team will continue to monitor the anticipated release of the OSHA guidelines as they related to the path out of the pandemic mandated vaccine requirement. The guidelines are expected to be released in 30 to 60 days. The HR team continues to respond to staff's individual specific questions and situations regarding the calculation of compensation under the new compensation model released in August. Each individual inquiry receives proper research, documentation, and recalculation. Our goal is to ensure that each individual is receiving the proper compensation. The committee will meet again on October 19th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom.
Excellent. Does anyone have any questions for Brian about anything he talked about? Or any suggestions for his committee that you might want to have considered for a future committee meeting? Seeing none, thank you very much, Brian. We'll move on to item 8.2.2, Communication, Community Relations. Ms. Kaiser.
Yeah, one second, I'm just finishing up a word. So we met at the September 27th Communications and Community Relations meeting. We discussed the upcoming school showcases. We've had a lot of excitement about the events amongst our schools. Our first one will be October 18th with Shared Journeys in Docky. They've already have a leg up on projects, and we also want to see them at all stages. So Shared Journeys in Docky, we're excited to be our first. We are encouraging not just classroom presentations, but co-curriculars, theater and musical ensembles, etc. We are also going to be streamlining to a centralized location online scholarship opportunities for all students, so there's an easy one-stop spot for everyone to go and have access without having to chase everything down. And that's it.
Well, that's great. I think it's a great thing to get everything located in one spot so students don't have to hunt and peck to try to figure out where
It's more
those things are.
equitable to have it all in one spot.
Yeah, definitely. Any questions for Ms. Kaiser? Or any suggestions for committee topics in the future? No? All right, well, thank you again, Ms. Kaiser. And then item 8.3, any board member reports of community events? Kristen.
So something I wanted to acknowledge today is that it is Indigenous Peoples Day. I work with Native Americans children, and it's very important to me that my children, and also there's a large Native population in the West Dallas, Milwaukee area who don't necessarily go to our school where I teach, but they do attend our public schools. And so I just wanted to very quickly acknowledge that the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District, we are now caretakers of this land. For those who were removed or erased from their traditional homelands here, including the Meskwaki, Sauk and Fox, Dakota Oyate, Iowa, Miami, Kickapoo, and Mascoutin, and the nations whose names we'll never know. For those who recently lived here as a nation, the Potawatomi, who reside here, and who are known as the Potawatomi today, and whose creation stories took place in our neighboring lands and where we are, who have called this territory home for as far back as can be remembered.
Fantastic.
Thank you for letting me have that.
Of course. Yeah, very important, though. Good to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day today. Any other any comments or community items that the board would like to bring forward? I just would like to note that tomorrow is Docky's very first PTSA meeting, so they had not had a PTSA previously, and they're getting one started up. So if there's anyone who is a parent or student or a staff member from Docky who would like to participate, they're meeting tomorrow, I believe at 6 p.m. At Docky. So I just wanted to bring that up, as that's a new thing and exciting for Docky to get moving. All right.
Did you do the board calendar and then superintendent's report? You skipped 8.1.
Oh, I did, yeah, because I was, okay. So I'll go over the board calendar, item 8.1. So today is October 11th at 6 p.m. We had a regular Board of Education meeting. Next Monday, October 18th at 6 p.m., we have a communication committee workshop that Ms. Kaiser talked about. We can have some of our start our school showcases. And after that, we have a financial stability and efficiency workshop for the 21-22 budget update. On October 25th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting, which also includes our final budget and tax levy. And on November 8th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting. You want to do all of that? Or do
Yeah, we can do the superintendent's report.
Okay. So we will move on to item 7, the superintendent's report.
Great, thank you. 7.1 is our update on our return to in-person learning, and Caitlin needs to get plugged in with the presentation. But as we do with each of our updates. We start with a little bit of an agenda, what I'll cover during the short presentation here. And so first, I always touch on our guiding principles that we've tried to follow throughout the last year and a half and continue to even going forward. Where we are with our health metrics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about something new we've been working on, is really what are the thresholds that would move us to virtual learning, right? So we've had that question kind of keep coming up, and even though we haven't gotten close to any thresholds that, maybe are various area districts have considered, I think it's important that we start considering what would move us to virtual learning in a school or grade level. If you could jump to the first slide. There you go. You can stay right there. So the guiding principles that we touch on all the time are, right, safety and well-being, and therefore setting thresholds of what might move us back to virtual learning that works for everybody, being responsive and flexible, and then the practicality of implementation. And so we've made decisions along the way based on the fact that there was some things that are just too difficult to implement, and being practical about what we're trying to do to navigate this time has been important for us. So you can go ahead to where we are in our external metrics. So I did get the latest burden data from our local health department. And we're stable again. Things are trending down a little bit in 3 of the 4 metrics that we monitor. Again, we monitor the burden status or burden rate of both Milwaukee County and West Allis, West Milwaukee. And then the same in terms of percent positive. And so percent positive for West Allis, West Milwaukee went up over the last couple of weeks. Everything else has trended down, but we haven't shifted any categories. So it's pretty stable in terms of where we are kind of in Milwaukee County and even more locally. You can go ahead to where we are with internal metrics. And this is now a little changed. This table has changed over time a bit. We have been tracking just the first 3 columns, which is the week or the date, where we are in our district positive case rate. So that is the percent positive, that's staff and students combined. So the total percentage of everybody. And then whether or not that indicator is green, yellow, or red. And so we have set right now our thresholds at yellow would be 3% and higher, and then 5 would turn red, and that's where we are going to start to talk about is the time to go back to virtual learning. The other indicator is going to be that we're going to start talking about now is quarantine, and we're doing raw counts and percentages, and this is recent, and Noah really asked us to pay attention to this. And so we've started tracking this. We hadn't been tracking it every day, counting like how many kids are in quarantine total and which schools are they attached to. So that's now part of the kind of data collection that we do every day. And so you see a couple of data points here, and that has gone up. And so we're at, on October 4th, just over 2% of students and staff combined again. So the percent of students and staff that are in quarantine, and there's way more students, so obviously it's more students as a part of the total. That has gone up, as of last week to 215, so 2.59%. And so that really leads us to the discussion about, so what are the thresholds when we look at those metrics that might move us back to virtual learning? And what we've been talking about, and with the health department, comparing to what some of our neighboring districts are doing, we're talking about 5% as the threshold, and it's both 5% positive and 5% of a school in quarantine. And the reason I think it's important that we consider both, if you think about a Longfellow or a Madison, it's very easy to have 5% of students out. During regular cold and flu season, there's typically more than 5% of the student body is out. And so if it's only percent positive, it's very likely that we would close Madison and Longfellow, being very small schools, pretty often. And so maybe that's not the wisest place to go. So combining that with total percent in quarantine, and with that reaching the 5%, those two combined is what we're going to start to pay attention to in a school. And again, our goal is to, the reason we're in masks, the goal is to have students in school and to keep them in school. And so far, we've been successful. Right? We haven't had to close any grade levels, any classrooms, any schools outright so far. And I'm saying so far, because we will if it honors, safety and well-being. But when you close a school, it also creates a sudden burden on families that now they have, especially young kids, right? So I'm using, Longfellow Madison as our examples here. But any of our elementary schools where there's young people now that have to stay home for 7 days or 10 days, and suddenly the family is scrambling again, and we're trying to avoid that if at all possible. And so staying with our mitigation practices and using these two factors to determine if we would go back to virtual learning, is kind of where we are at this point. There is not a great deal of science behind this that I can find of what is the right number. And so I've kind of selected a middle ground between, some schools are doing 3% at percent positive, and some are doing absolutely nothing in terms of monitoring data at all. So it's like, okay, let's find something that maybe is in the middle to see if that is reasonable for us. And so that's what we've suggested. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit more of so the data reporting that we're doing now. So this is actually up right on our web page. When you click on Return to In-Person Learning, you'll see this right away. And so it's a new graphic. Tess has done a nice job, and Amanda did a nice job very quickly today pulling this and putting it up. We've only, again, you see the blue bars, which are percent positive, and then you see the red where it kicks in, where we started to capture that data for the percent quarantine, right? That's why there's not red all the way through. So we've gotten as far as 3%, but we have yet to get close to 1% positive as a district, right? These are district totals. We've had one school, if I'm getting this right, I think we hit 2.44% in one of the schools once for percent positive. So we've gotten kind of halfway to that 5% mark so far. But this is now kind of linked into the spreadsheet, so it'll automatically update every single day. So parents that are watching this and are curious about where are we in the metrics, this is another tool that they can use to track and follow. So you can go to the last slide. So in terms of next steps, we're continuing for our intermediate and high schools, try to incentivize vaccinations and really encouraging that. So the custom socks are out and available, and so students that present secretary with a vaccination card, or parents come in and they have the medical documentation, the student gets a free pair of socks that are customized to their school. And I have them all laid out on my desk for each one of our intermediate and high schools, and they're pretty cool. It's a problem for me though, because now I have to pick what pair I put on in the morning, and then I have to make sure I go to that school. But we hopefully it encourages more students to participate, and we'll do the same when younger students are eligible for vaccinations. So with elementary schools, that's in the works as well. We're going to continue to monitor our health metrics and track the internal positivity rate. And then just like I talked about, is there a point at which we either have to go back to virtual learning, or are we far enough down the road and younger kids getting vaccinated that we're able to start to back off from mask requirements, which, I think we'd all love to get back to more of a sense of normal. But until we're confident that we can keep kids safe and in school, we're not going to be recommending that until after we see kind of the impact of vaccinations on younger kids. And then, again, just like it was mentioned in the Employee Engagement and Culture Committee report, we're just waiting for the OSHA guidance on requiring vaccines for employees. Right? And there too, it comes like if we close schools and the double-edged sword of what happens, the impact on parents. If we have employees that simply refuse, we already know we have challenges staffing, right? Everybody does these days. And does that make it worse? And that's going to be something we're going to have to talk about once we get the OSHA guidance. And so that's the update for return to in-person learning. So any questions there before I go on?
Do we have any data from schools that do not have mask requirements and their positivity and their burden rates and stuff like that? Have we reached out to any districts that don't have any?
I have not. It's a good question. I can do that. We'll see that part of the challenge is it's not collected or reported anywhere, right? We're not required to report kind of our internal numbers anywhere. And then it also creates is there consistency across the way we're tracking and other people are tracking? But it's probably worth asking, especially in places where, right, they don't have mask requirements the same that we do. So yeah, let me find out, and I can include that going forward.
Actually, Bill, I can answer that. So CDC actually came out with a report recently that showed that schools that do not have any sort of a mask requirement compared to schools that do have a higher incident of COVID percent positivity rate in their schools.
No, they don't. That's not.
As well as a higher incident of COVID positivity rate in their community. And also Oak Creek Franklin School District, which is a school district that does not have any sort of masking or quarantining policies, recently got a letter from their health department imploring them to put something in place because their positivity rate in their school and their quarantine orders in their school is multiples higher than everyone else in Waukee County, which everyone else except for them has some sort of a masking policy in place. So there is data both nationally and locally, which is pointing to the fact that masking does have a positive impact on reducing the amount of COVID that's transmitting, not only in schools, but also in our communities as a whole. And I'd be happy to share those things with you if you'd like.
Love to take a look.
Okay.
Just one other question. So have we talked with the health department about our percentages that we're kind of holding at, and what was their opinion about that, I guess?
So they didn't object, but they also didn't endorse.
Okay.
Right? So, again, I don't know that there's science around 5% or 3%. But I think what they encourage us to do is continue with our mitigation practices.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, so I'll go on to 7.2, which is the legislative update. Thanks, Caitlin. There's quite a bit here. I'm not going to read all of this word for word just because it's a lengthy update today. But there's been quite a bit of activity related to the K-12 education world in our legislature recently. So Senate Bill 373, that bill requires DPI to create a school district financial information portal, and we think this is probably a really good idea. School finances are pretty difficult to understand, and when you get into the information that is currently publicly available, it becomes pretty opaque pretty fast unless you really spend a lot of time with it and understand it well. So this one is supported, and because it will require no new data collection, it's just requiring DPI to create a new way to tell the story of school finances so that it's a little more understandable generally. Senate Bill 463, this would require each school board to post learning materials and educational activities used in public instruction. This one is opposed by the organizations we're a part of. So when you, in the report, when people see we oppose, it's not the board, it's really the SAA and SWSA. So the organizations that represent school boards in various parts of the state. The reason that this one gets opposed is because school boards have local control. That's a hallmark of the way public education is organized in all of the states, so there's local control. But there's also the concern about trying to manage what this would require, which would mean we would have to capture absolutely everything a teacher puts in front of students and make it publicly available. And so that means we would add staff. If we would have to abide by this, if this becomes law, we would have to staff up and have people that just run around and collect and scan and catalog. To make it happen. And so part of what SAA is opposing to is just the staffing capacity, especially for small districts. Districts that are, a third of our size, and most districts in the state are much smaller than that even. I think there's reason for SAA to oppose it. Assembly Bill 220, this bill specifies that the youth apprenticeship program must be included in the list of educational options that a school provides to parents and guardians, which we think is a good idea. The more information about options and opportunities young people have while they're in high school that might lead to a cool opportunity after high school is a good thing. We already include all of this information, but requiring it so that young people have access to this information about youth apprenticeship, I think is valuable. Senate Bill 398, this would add September 11th to the list of special observance days for schools as a day to remember the attacks that occurred in 2001. And so there's a whole list of special observance days in state statutes that school districts have to make sure they account for. Columbus Day is one of them, and we've expanded, even though we still recognize Columbus Day, we've expanded that to be also Indigenous Peoples Day, which is happening nationally as well. But the September 11th would add one more special observance day, and there's no reason not to support that. Senate Bill 449, this is grants to schools to provide critical incident mapping data to law enforcement. So this one we think makes sense if it helps us operate schools in a safer manner, it helps keep kids safe in schools by sharing more information with the police. That one is supported. Assembly Bill 411, under a bill, a school board is prohibited from allowing a teacher to teach pupils race or sex stereotyping and is prohibited from requiring an employee to attending a training that promotes race or sex stereotyping. So this one is opposed, in part because there's an aid penalty that provides for independent public citizens to sue schools, teachers, school boards. So it's a mechanism that I think creates way more problem than it solves. And so maybe there's other ways for us to have conversations about what really is driving kind of the momentum behind this kind of legislation. It's not just here in other parts of the state, and we would expect that, the current governor would veto it if it gets that far. Assembly Bill 435 requires the state superintendent of public instruction to incorporate cursive writing into model academic standards for English language arts. Again, WASB, so Wisconsin Association of School Boards, opposes it, again, on local control grounds. So if a school board thinks cursive writing instruction is important, then a school board should implement that. But rather, instead of it being a statewide mandate. Assembly Bill 561, the bill requires the school board annually to report to the DPI the number of pupils who attend a credit recovery course. That one we think does make sense, that we start to get a pulse of how many kids are in credit recovery courses, and I'd love to know. So how do we compare to neighboring school districts, and what are they doing differently that maybe we could learn from, or are we doing something that they might learn from? Assembly Bill 563, the bill requires a half credit of civics education for high school graduation, and to develop rules to develop a model civics curriculum. Here too, this one is supported. We think the more young people know about the mechanisms of government and the process of participating in government, the better. I was a social studies teacher. I taught civics for any number of years. It was a standard high school 9th grade course in Milwaukee. And of course, I always enjoy it, and it was always fascinating to me the number of misconceptions that 9th graders had at that point about how government works. So that one makes sense. Assembly Bill 564, the bill requires reports concerning state agency expenditure of federal coronavirus relief funds and requires allocating $100 million in those funds for public schools, charter, and private schools for mental health programs. And this one we would support, and WASB does as well. We know the challenges young people are facing right now as a result of the many disruptions that they've experienced in their lives in the last year and a half. And so WASB and we would support that. And then the GOP proposal would allow the governor to appoint the state superintendent. So there's a proposal that would change a number of what are currently elected positions. They're constitutionally determined that they're elected positions, to change it to appointed positions. And so I think that one I would bet WASB and other organizations will oppose. And then lastly, Jill Underly, our new state superintendent, delivered the State of Education address on October 23rd. And the Legislative Fiscal Bureau releases the estimated school aids on September 27th, and the final come out on October 15th. And then, again, this one I've said before, SAA supports tobacco 21 bill at the assembly hearing. So this is really targeting vape and vape products that are accessible to younger students. And then under the GOP, or under the redistricting plans, right, that come with each census, the GOP retains smaller partisan edge under Evers Commission maps. But just given the kind of how we lay out in our state, the GOP would still have some partisan edge in the new maps, but be a little bit smaller. And then the reading assessment bill that we've heard quite a bit about, that's going to receive a hearing. Did receive a hearing, sorry, held a public hearing this past Wednesday, October 6th. And so I'm sure we'll hear more about that as that one starts to move forward. And again, we feel that we're in pretty good shape given some of what we've adopted recently and what we're hearing they're going to move towards. We're already doing some of that work. But the concerns are just how prescriptive it is, and again, the idea of local control. So that was quite a bit in legislative update this week. 7.3, which is the Board of Education recognitions. So first of all, to our school board, October 3rd to the 8th was Wisconsin School Board Week, and we celebrated that with a little special dinner this evening. So we want to take this opportunity to thank all of you and past board members for their commitment to our students, communities, and our district. And it's a lot more work than maybe you thought when you started down this path. But it's important work for communities to have school boards that are really engaged. So I appreciate that as the superintendent, that I've been blessed with boards that really are committed to the work and stay engaged in the work. And then to our district from Serena Walker. She's the confidential assistant in the Office of Communications and Outreach for the U.S. Department of Education. And she and the Deputy Secretary of Education, as you're aware, visited our school district, and we hosted them at Dotke, and they spent the extra time to take a tour, which we were all thrilled with. And so she wrote this as a thank you. I want to personally thank you for assisting us in the planning the District Administrators Roundtable, We appreciate you sharing your community with us. The insight provided was truly invaluable and helps us do our work on your behalf. We are presenting the takeaways of this conversation to senior officials at the Department of Education and the White House. Please know that the Department of Education is here to support you in your efforts. We look forward to staying in touch. Please also be sure to share our gratitude with those that participated in the conversation. We greatly appreciate them taking time out of their days to meet with us. And we did have a number of area superintendents and other staff from neighboring districts that joined us at Dotke that day through the invitation. And then finally, 7.4, just some quick updates and information items. So response to public comments from September 27th, 2021. So Mr. Broadwell commented on a number of items, expressing concerns about CRT implementation, transgender guidelines, our potential referendum, our continued relationship with RIA Trust, as well as social and emotional learning. So I'm going to say it again and again, we continue to be committed to our equity work, but it's organized through our equity beliefs and the social justice standards, not through critical race theory. We have our guiding language and documents that we've had in place for a number of years. We have responded on a number of occasions related to our continued use of RIA Trust for employee health care, and the board just continued that relationship one more time. And they've come in consistently, as we saw in the last 3 years, with increases that are well below kind of what is regional or what is in the market generally. So that relationship makes sense to us, but again, we'll explore cost savings opportunities as we go forward. We put in place and consistently follow guidelines and procedures to support transgender students, while also, at the same time, we've expanded privacy rights for any students who may request them, right? So that our guidelines aren't just for transgender students, it's also for any student that needs a little bit more privacy when they come to school. So that work continues. And then the potential referendum, well, that's something the board will consider in the future, right? So no decisions have been made just yet. We're waiting for the results of the community-wide survey. And then the board will decide whether or not there is going to be a referendum put forward in front of our communities. In terms of our facility master planning, right, so that work does continue. We have one more community information session. We've added one. So it's this Thursday, October 14th. That's at Frank Lloyd Wright. It's at 6 o'clock. It'll be in the cafeteria. Remind people face masks are required, but we're arranging a separate room, just like we did in the last couple ones for people that don't want to wear a mask or can't wear a mask. They can still participate in a separate room. So we keep everybody safe. The way we organize it is we share a 30-minute presentation and then provide opportunities for members of the public to explore specific aspects of the facility master plan. So there's then a table with where you can find out more about facility conditions and needs. So what's the state of our old buildings? And that's Steve Eichmann does that, our facilities manager. There's then a table for if you're curious about design and construction. So if we're actually successful and we go into real design and we're starting to actually get shovels in the ground. So Bray Architects and C.G. Schmidt Construction Management are there to answer those questions. If members of the public are curious about budget, finance, and tax impact, that's Caitlin Windler, our Director of Finance and Operations. And then a big part of the plan is to modernize our aging buildings to support kind of project-based and hands-on learning. And then Deidre Raymer is available to answer those questions. And then lastly, I want to mention some work that we're doing when it's not unlike other school districts that are experiencing just, I think, more behavioral concerns among students than I think we're used to in a September. And it's, I think, a reality of the dynamics of what young people and families have experienced for the last year and a half, the last 18 months, and how disruptive it has been. And part of it is we recognize that, we have, for high schools, for example, there's essentially kind of 2 ninth grade classes coming in at the same time, right? So the 10th graders really didn't have a lot of typical school experience. They had a lot of education that took place during those 18 months. But in terms of the relationships that help them navigate high school, of relationships with each other, relationships with adults, and there's a gap now, and it's showing up in the behaviors that we're experiencing in some of the schools. And some of that gets responded to long-term by rebuilding relationships and trust and really getting kids to understand again, if it's the old saying, if you see something, you say something, right? That's how we keep schools safe. So you turn to an adult. But until that time, we're sending some pretty clear messages about what's the expectations are and holding young people to the code of conduct. And it may turn into higher suspension rates and expulsion rates than we're used to. And I want the board and the public to be aware of that. We're committed to keeping schools safe, and the vast majority of our kids are doing exactly what we expect every day. But if we have to send a really clear message about expectations, then we're prepared to do that. And so if there are more expulsion hearings coming forward, I don't like saying all of that, but it's the reality of where we are. And schools have to be safe places, and we can't run schools where that's not the case. And so I just want to be really clear and honest and open with the board and the public about that. But again, the long-term work is really rebuilding the relationships and the trust, and that comes through the social emotional learning we do. It comes through the restorative practices work that we do. But 30 days in, it's not enough to have established all of that after a year and a half away. So that is ongoing work. But it is where we are, and we're committed to getting back to where we used to be. So with that, I'll conclude the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Lutzman. Okay, so now we would move on to public comments. If everyone in the audience is wearing a mask, we can proceed with public comments. Ma'am, if you are still refusing to wear a mask and you're not willing to go participate in public comments out in the area that we have established for you, is that what you're saying?
I am not moving, no.
Okay. So you're refusing to wear a mask?
Yes.
All right. Okay, well then I guess I would look for a motion to adjourn.
No.
Can't do that, nice try.
No. You aren't gonna use that as an excuse for public comments not being heard. No, you're not. Don't try and pull that.
Absolutely not.
That is not gonna fly.
I have a motion, I'm looking for a second.
The agenda says
It's been motioned and second.
It's on the agenda.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
All right, that passes. We are adjourned.
You got